Victoria Ellison ripped the settlement papers in half and threw them across the boardroom table straight into the face of the lawyer who'd just told her to sell her company. "Get out," she said. 12 men in suits stared at the woman in the wheelchair, the woman they'd already written off. What none of them knew was that the quiet man waiting downstairs, a single father, a hired driver with a scratched leather jacket, and a 7-year-old daughter asleep in the back seat, was about to uncover a secret that would burn every one of them to the ground. Before we begin, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. And if stories about second chances still mean something to you, subscribe and stay with me to the very end. The first thing Nathan Cross noticed about Victoria Ellison was that she wouldn't let him touch the door. He'd pulled the black sedan up to the private entrance of Ellison Tower at 6:52 in the morning, 8 minutes early, the way he always was. He came around the side of the car, reached for the passenger door, the way he'd done for 1,000 clients, and a voice cut through the cold Chicago air like a blade. "I've got it." He stepped back. He watched her transfer herself from the wheelchair into the seat arms, only shoulders shaking with the effort, her jaw locked so tight he could see the muscle jumping in her cheek. It took her 40 seconds. He counted. And he did not move a single inch to help her because something in her eyes told him that helping her would be the worst thing he could possibly do. When she was finally in breathing hard, she looked up at him. "You didn't jump in." "You told me you had it," Nathan said. "Most people don't listen. Most people aren't getting paid to." For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not a smile, but the ghost of one. "Fold the chair. It goes in the trunk. Don't scratch it. It's carbon fiber. It cost more than your car." "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am." "Yes, Miss Ellison." "Victoria." He didn't argue. He folded the chair, laid it in the trunk on the moving blanket he'd already spread there without being asked, and shut the lid soft. 6 days earlier, Nathan Cross had almost not answered the phone. He'd been standing in the kitchen of a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like burnt toast, holding a stack of bills he already knew the numbers on when the screen lit up with a number he didn't recognize. He almost let it ring out. Emma was in the next room, singing to herself off-key, the way she always did when she was drawing, and he'd wanted 5 more seconds of just listening to her, before the world came asking for money he didn't have. He answered on the 4th ring. "Mr. Cross, Nathan Cross. Speaking." "My name is Gloria Pham. I'm the personal assistant to Victoria Ellison. You were referred to us." He'd frowned. "Referred by who?" "Colonel Bill Reyes. He said, and I'm quoting him, that you were the only driver in this city he'd trust to drive his own mother." Nathan had leaned against the counter and closed his eyes. Bill Reyes. His old commanding officer, the man who'd pulled him out of a burning transport truck outside Kandahar in 2009, and never once let him say thank you, because that's the job. Cross, don't make it weird. He hadn't heard that name in 3 years. "Is this a joke?" Nathan asked. "Ms. Ellison does not joke, Mr. Cross. The position is full-time. Private driver. The compensation is—" Gloria had paused and then said a number. Nathan had made her repeat it. He'd made her repeat it a second time. Then he'd looked through the doorway at his daughter at her sneakers with the hole in the left toe at the school trip permission slip on the fridge he'd been avoiding because the field trip cost $40 he didn't have. And he heard himself say, "When do I start?" "There's an interview first." "Of course there is." "Ms. Ellison would like to meet you. Wednesday, 9 a.m. And Mr. Cross." "Yeah, she's been through a great deal. The last 4 drivers didn't last a week. I'm telling you that so you don't take it personally when it happens to you too." Nathan had almost laughed. "What happened to the other 4? "They felt sorry for her," Gloria said. She could smell it on them. The interview had lasted 90 seconds. He'd been shown into an office on the top floor, all glass and silence, and she'd been sitting behind a desk the size of a rowboat with a stack of files in front of her and dark circles under her eyes that no amount of money could hide. She hadn't looked up when he came in. "Sit," she'd said. He sat. "You were military." 10 years, Army. Logistics, then transport. You drove trucks. I drove everything. And I fixed everything I drove. She'd finally looked up at him then, and he'd felt her studying him, the way a customs agent studies a passport looking for the lie. You have a daughter. I do. Where's her mother? He didn't flinch. He'd learned a long time ago that flinching was worse. She passed, 3 years ago. Cancer. Victoria had held his eyes for a long moment. Most people softened right there. Most people said, "I'm so sorry," and reached across some invisible space with a sympathy he never asked for and couldn't use. She didn't. Then you know, she said quietly. Know what? That the worst part isn't the thing that happened. It's everyone treating you like you're made of glass afterward. Nathan had sat very still, and then he'd said the truest thing he knew. The worst part is that they stop asking you to do things. Like you're already gone. Something in her chest seemed to let go just slightly. She'd looked back down at the files. You start Monday. 6 a.m. Don't be late. Don't be sorry for me. And don't... She'd looked up one last time. Do not ever try to push my chair. I'll tell you when I need something. I always will. Understood. That's all. He'd stood up, walked to the door, and her voice caught him with his hand on the handle. Cross. Yeah. Colonel Reyes said you don't quit. Is that true? Nathan had turned around and looked at the most powerful woman in Chicago sitting alone in a room the size of his entire apartment, and he'd understood right then that the question wasn't really about the job. I've never quit anything in my life, he said. The only thing I ever lost, I fought for till the very end. She hadn't answered. But she hadn't looked away either. Now it was Monday, and they were sitting in Chicago traffic on Lakeshore Drive, and Victoria Ellison had not said a word in 20 minutes. Nathan didn't fill the silence. That was another thing the last 4 drivers had probably gotten wrong. Grieving people didn't need chatter. They needed room. You're not going to ask, she finally said, watching the gray water out the window. Ask what? About the chair. Everyone asks. Or they don't ask which is louder. It's none of my business, Nathan said. You'll tell me if you want me to know, or you won't. Either way, my job is to get you where you're going. She turned from the window and looked at the back of his head. Car accident. 14 months ago. Spinal cord injury. T10. That's the number they give you. T10. Like a code. It means I can feel my hips, but nothing below. She said it flat clinical, like she'd rehearsed it 100 times to strip the feeling out of it. The doctors say there's a small chance with enough rehab that I might regain some function. Might. They love that word. You believe them? There was a long pause. No, she said. But I go anyway, 3 times a week. It's the only appointment I never cancel. Nathan nodded slowly. Then I'll never make you late for it. She studied the back of his neck for a moment longer, and then she turned back to the window, and this time, when the silence came, it felt different. Not empty, shared. He learned her routine fast because that was what he was good at, reading a mission, learning the terrain, anticipating. She left the penthouse at 6 a.m. sharp because she didn't sleep past 4 and hated pretending to. She took her coffee black and cold. She'd forget it was there and let it go cold, and then drink it anyway, out of spite, he thought, at a world that had taken so much from her, that a cup of hot coffee felt like a luxury she hadn't earned. She worked in the back seat with 2 phones and a laptop balanced on her knees, and she talked to men in New York and London and Zurich in a voice that never once cracked a voice that made billionaires nervous. But Nathan saw the other things, the things they didn't. He saw how when she thought no one was watching, she'd press 2 fingers hard against her own thigh over and over, waiting to feel something, and how her face would go blank when she felt nothing at all. He saw how she gripped the door handle white-knuckled every single time they went over the same bridge, the one on Wacker, and how she never said why, but always went quiet a half-mile before it. He saw how she never let anyone stand behind her chair. Never. She'd angle herself so her back was to a wall before she'd let a stranger get behind her. He didn't ask about any of it. He filed it away. That was his training. You don't ask the frightened animal what it's afraid of. You watch and you learn where the edges are, and you don't cross them. On the 9th day, she found out about Emma. He'd gotten a call at a red light. Emma's school, the aftercare program, saying Emma had a fever and needed to be picked up, and there was no one else on the emergency contact list, because there was no one else. Nathan's whole body had gone tight. He'd have to explain to Victoria Ellison that he needed to leave on day 9, that he was already the guy who put his kid first, already the liability Gloria had warned him he'd become. He'd hung up and started, "Miss Ellison, I have to—" "I heard," Victoria said. "Drive to the school, now. I'll drop you at the office first. It's only 10 minutes out of the—" Nathan. It was the first time she'd used his first name. "Drive to the school." He drove to the school. Emma came out red-cheeked and glassy-eyed and clutching her backpack, and Nathan scooped her up, and when he turned around to apologize to Victoria in the car, he found Victoria had already lowered her window. "What's your name?" Victoria asked the little girl. Emma blinked at her. "Emma? What's yours?" "Victoria." "Why are you in the back? Daddy sits in the front." "Emma," Nathan started. But Victoria's mouth twitched. "Because I'm too important to drive myself. It's very sad. Do you want to sit back here with me? I have a phone with games on it that no one ever lets me play with." And Emma, feverish, exhausted, 7 years old, looked at the strange, elegant woman in the back of her dad's work car, and made the decision small children make with a certainty adults have long since lost. She climbed in. Nathan drove them home with his daughter asleep against the shoulder of a woman worth $2 billion, and in the rearview mirror he saw Victoria Ellison look down at the sleeping child, and he saw something on her face he had never seen there before. She looked for one unguarded moment like she was going to cry. She didn't. She looked up, caught him watching in the mirror, and her face slammed shut like a door. "Eyes on the road," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am." But there was no edge in it anymore. And a mile later, still watching his daughter sleep, she said very quietly, so quietly he almost missed it, "She's not afraid of me." "Why would she be afraid of you?" Victoria didn't answer. She just looked out the window and pressed 2 fingers slowly against her own thigh, waiting to feel something, feeling nothing at all. The turn came 3 weeks in, and it came in a parking garage. Nathan had dropped Victoria at a board meeting, a big one he could tell, because she'd been sharper all morning, the coffee colder, the phone calls harder. He was waiting in the car in the underground garage when 2 men in suits walked past, close enough that their voices carried through his cracked window, and one of them said a sentence that made Nathan Cross go very, very still. If she'd just take the settlement, this all goes away, but she won't. She keeps digging into the crash reports. Marcus is getting nervous. Let her dig. There's nothing to find. The mechanic's report was buried 8 months ago. And if she finds it, a pause. Footsteps. Then we make sure she has another accident. A worse one. Nathan sat frozen in the driver's seat as the 2 men climbed into a car 3 spaces down and drove off up the ramp. His hands were flat on his own knees. His heart was slow and cold, the way it used to get in the field in the seconds before everything went loud. The mechanic's report was buried. Another accident. A worse one. He'd been a logistics man. He'd spent 10 years reading manifests and maintenance logs and figuring out why trucks failed, which failures were where, and which failures were sabotage. Because in a war zone, the difference between the two was the difference between a bad day and a dead convoy. He knew what a buried mechanic's report meant. He knew exactly what it meant. Victoria Ellison's car accident had not been an accident, and the men who'd done it were still in the building above his head, and they were talking about doing it again. He should have driven her straight home. He should have said nothing, done nothing, protected the job that was buying his daughter's shoes, and a real doctor for her fevers, and God, maybe college one day. He had a kid. He had one kid, and no wife, and no safety net, and a bank account that had cried for 3 years. And the smart thing, the only sane thing, was to keep his mouth shut and his eyes forward and drive the nice lady from point A to point B and cash the check. That's what a smart man would do. Nathan sat in that garage for 40 minutes, and by the time Victoria came down in the service elevator, exhausted jaw, locked 3 files in her lap, he already knew with the same cold certainty he'd once known walking toward a burning truck that he was not going to do the smart thing. He came around the car. She started her transfer. He waited hands at his sides and did not help. "You're quiet," she said, buckling in. "Quieter than usual. Something happened." Nathan folded the wheelchair, laid it in the trunk on the blanket, shut the lid soft, and got in the driver's seat. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. This proud, frightened, brilliant woman, who gripped door handles over bridges and never let anyone stand behind her chair, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he understood exactly why she was afraid of every road they drove. Because somebody had already tried to kill her on one. "Miss Ellison," Nathan said, and his voice was steady and his hands were still. "The crash that put you in that chair. Did anyone ever look at the car afterward, the actual car, the brakes, the steering, the mechanical report?" In the mirror, he watched every ounce of color drain out of Victoria Ellison's face. "Why?" she said slowly. "Are you asking me that?" "Because you've been digging into the crash reports. And 2 men upstairs just told each other the mechanic's report was buried 8 months ago. And then one of them said, 'If you find it—'" "Stop." Her voice was a whisper. "Stop the car." He was already stopped. They were in the garage. She didn't seem to know it. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere 14 months in the past, on a bridge on Wacker, with a steering wheel that wouldn't turn. "Say it," she said. "Say the rest of it." Nathan turned around in his seat so he was facing her directly. No mirror between them, and he said, the thing he could not unsay, the thing that turned a job into a war. He said if you find the report, they make sure you have another accident, a worse one. For a long moment, Victoria Ellison didn't move. Then her hand came up, that same hand that pressed against her own dead thigh 100 times a day, waiting to feel something, and pressed flat against her mouth. Her eyes were huge and glassy and furious and terrified all at once. "I knew it," she whispered, and it broke halfway through the first crack he'd ever heard in that granite voice. "For 14 months, everyone told me I was paranoid. My doctors, my board, my own brother. They said the trauma was making me imagine that I couldn't accept it was just bad luck, just ice on the road, just—" She stopped. Her hand was shaking. "I knew the wheel didn't turn. I've replayed it 10,000 times. I turned the wheel and nothing happened." "Then you weren't imagining it," Nathan said quietly. "You were the only one telling the truth." And Victoria Ellison, who hadn't cried in front of another living soul since the day she woke up in a hospital bed, and couldn't feel her legs, put both hands over her face, and finally in the back of a parked car, in an underground garage, let herself come apart. Nathan didn't reach for her. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He didn't do a single one of the useless things the other 4 drivers would have done. He just stayed. He sat there, turned around in his seat, close enough that she'd know she wasn't alone, and far enough that she'd keep her dignity, and he let her fall apart at her own pace, the way he'd once let her transfer herself into the car at her own pace. Because he understood the only thing she'd asked of him from the very first morning: "I'll tell you when I need something. I always will." When it passed, and it did pass because she was the strongest person he'd ever met, she wiped her face with the back of her hand, sat up straight, and looked at him with eyes that were red and raw and suddenly dangerously clear. "They're going to try again," she said. "Yes, you could walk away from this. You have a daughter. This isn't your fight, and no one would blame you for driving me home and quitting tomorrow and never looking back." She held his eyes. "I'm giving you the door, Nathan. I'm telling you it's open. Take it." Nathan Cross thought about Emma. He thought about her sneaker with the hole in the toe and the college he wanted to send her to, and the promise he'd made to her dying mother that he would keep her safe always, no matter what. And then he thought about a woman who gripped door handles over bridges and pressed her fingers against a leg that couldn't feel them and angled her back to the wall so no one could get behind her. A woman the whole world had called crazy for telling the truth. He thought about the burning truck outside Kandahar and the man who'd walked into the fire to pull him out, and how that man had never once let him say thank you. That's the job, Cross. Don't make it weird. No, Nathan said. Victoria blinked. No. I told you at the interview. He turned back around, put the car in drive, and pulled toward the exit ramp with both hands steady on the wheel. I've never quit anything in my life, and the only thing I ever lost. He pulled out into the gray Chicago daylight, checking every mirror, watching every car a soldier again after all these years. I fought for till the very end. In the back seat, Victoria Ellison looked at the back of his head for a long, long time. And then, for the first time in 14 months, she reached forward and very deliberately let the driver be the one thing standing between her and the road. Then don't lose this one, she said. The drive home that night was the longest 15 minutes of Nathan Cross's life, and not one word passed between them until they reached the penthouse garage. Victoria broke the silence first. Don't take Wacker anymore, ever. When you drive me. I already stopped taking Wacker 2 weeks ago, Nathan said. Her head came up. You what? You grip the door handle every time we hit that bridge, so I stopped taking it. I've been going the long way around since the second week. For a moment, she just stared at the back of his head, and he watched in the mirror as the understanding landed on her face like a slow wave. He'd known. Before he knew anything, he'd already known enough to protect her from a bridge she couldn't explain her fear of. She turned to the window so he wouldn't see whatever was happening on her face. How many other things have you noticed? She said, and it wasn't quite a question. All of them, Nathan said honestly. It's my job to notice things. It's the only thing I've ever been good at. That night, after he'd carried a sleeping Emma up 3 flights of stairs and tucked her into bed with the hole-toed sneakers by the door, Nathan sat at his kitchen table and did not sleep. He pulled out a yellow legal pad, the kind he used to use for convoy planning, and he wrote down everything he'd heard in that garage, word for word, while it was still fresh. Settlement. Marcus is getting nervous. The mechanic's report was buried 8 months ago. Another accident, a worse one. 2 names, Marcus, and whoever Marcus answered to. He sat there until 3 in the morning, and when the phone buzzed on the table, he already knew who it was. You're awake, Victoria said. So are you. I don't sleep, you know that. A pause. Nathan, I need you to understand something before tomorrow. If we do this, if we really do this, you can't tell anyone. Not a friend, not a lawyer, not Colonel Reyes. The moment one person outside this car knows we're both dead. Do you understand? I've kept secrets that got people killed for talking, Nathan said quietly. This one I'll keep to protect 2 people from getting killed. That's easier. He heard her exhale on the other end of the line. The man's name is Marcus Ellison, she said. He's my brother. Nathan closed his eyes. Of course it was. It was always family. In every convoy that got hit, it was always someone who'd had access, someone who'd known the route someone trusted. He's the chief operating officer. Victoria went on, and her voice was flat and terrible. When I was in the hospital unconscious, unable to sign anything, he took emergency control of the company. Temporary, he said. Just to keep the lights on, he said. That was 14 months ago. He's been trying to make it permanent ever since. If I'm declared unfit, if I have a breakdown, if I have another accident, if I simply disappear, he inherits everything. $2 billion. He's my little brother Nathan. I taught him to ride a bike. Do you have proof he was behind the crash? No. Her voice cracked. That's the whole nightmare. I have a feeling. I have a wheel that wouldn't turn. And I have 14 months of everyone I love telling me I'm insane. Then tomorrow, Nathan said, we start getting you proof. They started the next morning at 6 a.m. sharp, and Victoria was already in the car when he came down, having transferred herself. Having folded nothing, because she couldn't, and Nathan realized she'd been sitting in the cold garage waiting for him, because she couldn't stand to be alone in that penthouse for one more minute, knowing what she now knew. The mechanic, Nathan said, pulling out. The one who wrote the buried report. You know his name. Danny Alvarez. He runs the fleet garage that services all our executive vehicles. He was the one who inspected my car after the crash. He filed his report, and then 2 days later he called the hospital asking to speak to me. My assistant said he sounded terrified. I was in a coma. By the time I woke up, he'd stopped calling. I always wondered why. Because someone got to him, Nathan said. Where's the garage? West side. Nathan, you can't just walk in there. If Marcus finds out we talked to Danny, I'm not going to walk in and ask about your car. He checked the mirror, changed lanes. I'm going to walk in as a driver whose employer needs an oil change, which happens to be true, and I'm going to talk shop with another mechanic the way mechanics do, and I'm going to find out what kind of man Danny Alvarez is. That's all. Today, that's all. Victoria was quiet a moment. You've done this before. I've done exactly this before, just with more sand and more people shooting at me. He almost smiled. Danny Alvarez is a lot less scary than a Taliban supply line. The garage was a squat concrete building with 3 bays and the smell of motor oil hanging in the air like weather, and Nathan pulled the sedan in and asked the kid at the front for an oil change and a brake inspection, casual, unhurried. And then he waited, leaning against the wall, until a man in his 50s, with grease-black hands and tired eyes, came out to look at the car, and Nathan watched the man's whole body change the instant he saw the Ellison Company plates. He watched Danny Alvarez go pale. He watched him glance toward the office, then toward the street. He watched a man who was afraid recognize the car of the woman he'd failed to warn. "Company car," Danny said, and his voice was careful. "Which executive?" "Ms. Ellison," Nathan said, and watched the name hit him. "I'm her new driver." Danny's hand stopped moving on the hood. For 3 full seconds he didn't breathe. Then he said too quickly, "The oil's fine, brakes are fine, you're good to go, no charge." And he turned to walk away, and Nathan said quietly to his back, "You called the hospital 14 months ago. You tried to warn her." Danny Alvarez froze in the middle of his own garage. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yeah, you do." Nathan didn't move toward him. He kept his voice low-level, unthreatening, the voice he used to talk frightened kids off of loaded weapons. "You inspected her car after the crash. You saw something. You picked up a phone and you tried to tell her, and then somebody made you stop. And you've been carrying it around for 14 months, haven't you? It's why you look the way you look." Danny turned around slowly. His eyes were wet. "Who are you?" "I'm the guy who drives her now. And I'm the guy who's going to make sure nobody finishes what they started. But I can't do it without you, Danny." "You don't understand." Danny's voice dropped to almost nothing, and he glanced at the office again. "They said if I ever opened my mouth, I've got kids, man. I've got 3 kids. They came to my house. They knew my kids' names, my daughter's bus route. You understand what I'm saying to you? They knew her bus route. And there it was, the same threat. The same pressure point, the same cold professionals who'd found the one thing a father couldn't gamble with. Nathan felt something go very hard and very quiet inside his chest. "I've got a daughter, too," Nathan said. 7 years old. "So I'm not going to stand here and tell you your fear is wrong, because it's not. It's the smartest thing about you, but I'm going to tell you the truth that nobody's told you in 14 months. He took 1 step closer. "They're going to hurt her anyway. Men like this don't leave a loose thread just because it stays quiet. The only thing that makes you safe is when they're behind bars and everything you know is already out. Silence isn't protection, Danny. Silence is just the waiting room." Danny Alvarez put a grease-black hand over his face and stood in the middle of his own garage, and for a long moment Nathan thought he'd lost him. Then Danny said muffled, "I made a copy." Nathan went still. "A copy of what?" "The report. The real one. Before they made me file the fake one." Danny lowered his hand. The brake line on her car was cut, not worn, not old. Cut. Clean, with a tool 3/4 of the way through so it'd hold under normal driving and fail the second she braked hard. Which she did. On a bridge. In the rain. His voice shook. "I've had the copy in a safety deposit box for 14 months. And I have prayed every single night that nobody ever came asking, because I knew the day somebody came asking would be the day I had to decide whether I was a coward for the rest of my life." Nathan didn't move. He didn't want to spook it. "Danny, That report can put the man who did this away and protect your kids for good. But I can't ask you for it here. Not with cameras, not with someone maybe listening. I need you to think about it. And when you're ready, only when you're ready, you call this number." He wrote it on the back of the oil change slip. "It rings to me, nobody else." Danny took the slip with a shaking hand and shoved it deep in his coverall pocket. "How do I know you're not one of them?" Nathan thought about it. Then he said, "Because one of them wouldn't have let you keep the copy. They'd already be taking it from you." He nodded once. "I'll be waiting for your call. Take care of your kids, Danny." He got in the car and pulled out, and it wasn't until they were 3 blocks away that Victoria, who had heard every word through the cracked window and the phone he'd left on speaker in his pocket, finally spoke, and her voice was barely a whisper. The brake line was cut. Yes, it wasn't ice. She was staring straight ahead at nothing. "For 14 months, I let them tell me it was ice. My own brother sat by my hospital bed and held my hand and told me it was ice on the road and that I was lucky to be alive." Her whole body was trembling now, but not with tears, with something colder and older and far more dangerous. "He cut my brake line and then he held my hand. We don't know it was him personally," Nathan said carefully. "We know it was someone protecting him. There's a difference legally." "There's no difference to me." "There has to be," Nathan said, and he caught her eye in the mirror. "Because if you go in there wanting revenge, you'll make a mistake, and they'll bury you. If you go in wanting proof, you'll win. I need you to be the smartest person in every room from here on out. Can you do that?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, Victoria Ellison, who had built a $2 billion company out of nothing but a brutal mind and an unbreakable spine, looked at the back of her driver's head and said in a voice that had gone terrifyingly calm, "I've been the smartest person in every room I've ever entered. Watch me." 2 days passed with no call from Danny. 2 days of Nathan checking his phone every time it buzzed of Victoria going to board meetings and smiling at her brother across a table while she memorized the way he lied. And on the 3rd day, everything accelerated. It was a Thursday, 4:15 in the afternoon, and Nathan was parked outside Emma's school waiting for the bell when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, and a voice he did. "It's Danny." He was whispering, and there was traffic behind him, and something in his voice was pure panic. "They know. They know somebody talked to me. A guy came by the garage an hour after you left asking the front kid who'd been in asking about the driver. I lied. I said I didn't remember. But they're gonna pull the cameras, man. They're gonna see your face and your plates, and I gotta get out. I gotta get my kids and get out of the city tonight." Nathan's whole body went cold. "Danny, listen to me. Do you have the report on you?" "It's in the deposit box. I'm going there now. Then I'm getting my kids from school, and we're gone." "No. Don't go to the box. They might be watching it. Get your kids first. Get them somewhere safe, somewhere public right now. Then call me, and I'll come to you, and we'll figure out the report together. Do not go anywhere alone. Do you hear me?" "I can't wait. I gotta—" "Danny!" But the line was already dead. Nathan sat frozen with the phone in his hand, and then Emma came bouncing out of the school with her backpack and her gap-toothed smile, and he had to swallow the terror whole and smile back because that was the job of a father, to hold the fear behind his teeth so his kid never tasted it. He buckled her in. His hands were shaking, and even as he pulled out, he was calling Victoria. "Danny's running," he said the second she picked up. "They found out someone talked to him. He's going for the report, and then for his kids, and he won't wait for me." "Where are you?" "I've got Emma. I just picked her up." "Victoria, I can't take my daughter into this. I have to get her home first. Bring her here." No hesitation. "Bring her to the penthouse. Gloria's here. She'll watch her. Emma likes the games, remember? She'll be safer here than anywhere in the city, and you know it. Then, you go find Danny." Nathan almost argued. Then he pictured his apartment with its flimsy door and its street-level windows, and he pictured the penthouse 40 floors up with a private elevator and a security desk. And he made the call a soldier makes when the mission changes under his feet. "I'm coming to you. He broke 3 traffic laws getting there, and when the elevator opened into the penthouse, Victoria was waiting in the entryway, and Emma ran straight to her like they were old friends, and Victoria caught the little girl's hand and said, "Emma, guess what? I have a whole box of games and cookies that nobody's allowed to eat but you." And over Emma's head her eyes found Nathan's, and everything unspoken passed between them in half a second. "Go. I've got her. Come back. Daddy has to go help a friend," Nathan said, crouching to Emma's level. "You're going to stay with Miss Victoria. She's my boss, and she's very important, so you do exactly what she says. Okay?" "Is she your friend now?" Emma asked. Nathan looked up at Victoria. "Yeah," he said. "She's my friend now." He drove to Danny's garage first, and it was dark, closed a note on the door in Spanish. He drove to the elementary school where Danny had said his kids went, and the parking lot was empty, buses long gone. And then his phone rang, and it was Danny, and he was crying. "I got 'em," Danny sobbed. "I got my kids. We're okay. We're at the church on Ashland, the big one. There's people here. I did what you said." "Good. Good, Danny, you did good. Stay there. Stay with people. I'm 10 minutes out. Did you get the report?" A pause that lasted a lifetime. "No," Danny whispered. "There was a car outside the bank. 2 guys. I drove past. I couldn't risk it, not with my kids in the car." "That's the right call. Report's no good to anybody if you're dead. I'm coming to you. We'll figure out the box later. 10 minutes. Nathan made it in 8. And when he pulled up to the church, he saw Danny standing on the steps with 2 little kids clutched against his legs, and a car seat carrier in his hand, looking small and gray and terrified in the fading light. And Nathan felt a wave of relief so strong it almost buckled him. He'd made it. They were both fathers, and they'd both gotten their kids out, and now they'd... The black SUV came around the corner slow. Nathan saw it a half-second before Danny did, and every alarm he'd ever learned in 10 years of war went off at once. He was already out of the car, already moving, already yelling, "Danny, inside! Get inside now!" And Danny turned, saw the SUV, and grabbed his kids and lunged for the church doors. And Nathan put his body between the SUV and the children on the steps, and the window came down, and there was a man there. And the man looked at Nathan Cross, and Nathan looked back and memorized his face, the way he'd memorized enemy faces in another life. The man didn't have a gun. That was the thing Nathan would think about later lying awake. The man just looked at him calm and unhurried, and said, "You're the driver." "I'm the driver," Nathan said. "You have no idea what you're standing in front of." "I've stood in front of worse." The man smiled, and it was the worst thing Nathan had seen in years because it wasn't angry. It was patient. It was the smile of a man who had all the time in the world and all the money in the world, and had done this before and would do it again. "Danny doesn't have the report," the man said. "We know he never took it out of the box. We know exactly where it is, and by tomorrow morning it won't exist. So you and Danny and your little girl and whatever Ms. Ellison thinks she's building, none of it matters. There's nothing to find." He tilted his head. "Go home to your daughter, driver. This is the one warning you get." The window went up. The SUV pulled away slow and unbothered, and Nathan stood on the church steps with his heart hammering and watched it disappear. And behind him, he heard Danny's children crying, and Danny praying in Spanish, and he understood that the man was right about one thing and catastrophically wrong about another. He was right that the report would be gone by morning. He was wrong that there was nothing to find, because a man who'd cut a brake line clean 3/4 through with a tool was a man who knew engines, and a man who knew engines that well didn't work alone and didn't work for free, and left a trail of exactly the kind Nathan Cross had spent 10 years learning to follow. Money, logistics, access. The report was just the what. Nathan didn't need the what. Nathan needed the who paid for it, and that was a different kind of hunt entirely, and it was the only kind he'd ever been good at. He got Danny and the kids into the church basement with the pastor, a big, calm man who asked no questions, and he called a contact from his army days who did private security and owed him a life. And by 9 that night, Danny Alvarez and his 3 children were in a van heading to a safe house 2 states away out of the game, safe done. Danny gripped Nathan's hand through the van window before they left. "The report's gonna be gone," Danny said. "I'm sorry, I waited too long. I was a coward for 14 months, and now it's gone and I got nothing to give you." "You gave me everything," Nathan said. "You told me the brake line was cut. You told me it was clean professional 3/4 through. You told me they came to your house and knew your daughter's bus route. Danny, you gave me the shape of them. I don't need the paper. I know how these people work now. Go take care of your kids. You're a good father. You always were. You were just scared. There's no shame in scared." Danny's eyes filled. "Who are you, man? Really?" Nathan watched the van pull away into the dark, and he answered honestly to himself, because Danny was already gone. "Somebody who's tired of watching good people get run over by rich ones." When he got back to the penthouse, it was past 11, and the first thing he saw when the elevator opened was Emma asleep on the enormous white couch tucked under a cashmere throw that probably cost more than his rent, with a plate of half-eaten cookies on the floor and a tablet still glowing in her small hands. And beside the couch in her chair sat Victoria awake, watching over the sleeping child, and she looked up when he came in with an expression he'd never seen on her before. Something unguarded and raw and almost frightened. "She fell asleep at 9, Victoria whispered. "She made me read her 3 books. She said her mom used to read her 4, but 3 was okay because I was still learning." Victoria's voice caught. "She told me about her mother Nathan. A 7-year-old told me about grief better than any therapist I've paid in 14 months. She said you cry sometimes when you think she's asleep, and she pretends she doesn't hear because she doesn't want you to feel bad." Nathan stood very still in the entryway. He hadn't known that. He hadn't known his daughter hurt him. "Danny's safe," he said, because he couldn't respond to the other thing not yet, not standing up. "His kids are safe. They're gone out of the city protected, but they got to him before he could get the report and they're destroying it tonight. It's gone." He watched the hope drain out of Victoria's face, and he moved fast to catch it. "Listen to me. We lost the paper. We didn't lose the case. The man who threatened me tonight told me they know exactly where the report is, and it'll be gone by morning, which means they haven't destroyed it yet. Which means for the next several hours, it still exists. And more than that, he told me something without knowing he told me. He said Danny never took it out of the box. How would he know that?" Victoria's eyes sharpened. "They've been watching the deposit box. They've been watching the bank. Which means they have someone inside the bank, or they have surveillance on it, and either one is a thread I can pull. And there's more." Nathan crouched down beside her chair, so they were eye to eye, keeping his voice low so Emma wouldn't stir. "A cut brake line clean and professional isn't a crime of passion. It's a contract. Somebody hired a professional. Professionals get paid. Money moves, and money leaves a trail. And your brother, if it's your brother, controls a company with 1,000 ways to hide a payment, but not a single way to erase it completely. Victoria, you don't need Danny's report. You need your own financial records. You need to find the payment. And you're the CEO. You have access to things Marcus can't lock you out of because on paper you still own everything." Victoria stared at him, and he watched the fear on her face slowly transform into something else. Into the thing that had made her a titan before a cut brake line ever put her in a chair. Into the hunter. "There's a forensic audit I can order," she said slowly. "As majority shareholder. Marcus can delay it, but he can't stop it. If I frame it as routine quarterly compliance, nothing unusual. He won't panic," Nathan finished. "He won't know we're looking for the payment. He'll think it's paperwork. It'll take weeks. Then we take weeks. Danny's safe. We're careful. We take exactly as long as it takes." He glanced at Emma, sleeping under the cashmere throw. "But from now on, we're smarter than tonight. I got made at that garage because I walked in the front door. That was sloppy. That was me being a driver instead of what I used to be. It won't happen again." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and then she reached out and she did something she had never done. Something that in 6 weeks she had never once allowed herself. She put her hand on his forearm, where it rested on the arm of her chair, and she left it there. "What did you used to be?" she asked quietly. Nathan looked down at her hand on his arm. He couldn't remember the last time someone had touched him on purpose, gently asking nothing. He'd been a father for so long, giving comfort always the one holding never held. Something in his chest ached in a way he didn't have a name for. I was the guy they sent, he said, when they needed to know why something failed. A truck, a supply line, a mission. Everybody else saw an accident. My whole job was to prove it wasn't. To find the one bolt somebody loosened on purpose. He met her eyes. I spent 10 years learning to see the exact thing that's happening to you. Everybody told you it was ice. I'm the one guy in your whole life who was trained to know it wasn't. Victoria's hand tightened on his arm. And for a moment, neither of them said anything, and the only sound was Emma's soft breathing on the couch, and the hum of the city 40 floors below. And something enormous and unspoken sitting in the room between two people who had both learned to carry everything alone. Colonel Reyes didn't just refer me a driver, Victoria said finally, and her voice was strange, almost wondering. Did he? What do you mean? He knew what I was dealing with. He's an old friend of my father's, that's how I found him. When I told him months ago that I thought the crash wasn't an accident, and that nobody believed me. She trailed off. He said he knew someone. He said, I know a man who'll believe you, because believing the crash wasn't an accident is the only thing he was ever good at. I thought he meant you could drive. I thought I was hiring a driver. Nathan went very still. He didn't send me a driver, Victoria whispered. He sent me an investigator. He sent me the one man in America trained to prove exactly what I've been screaming for 14 months, and he made it look like a driving job so Marcus would never see it coming. Nathan sat back on his heels, and something in him that had been numb for 3 years since the funeral, since the world had narrowed to just keeping Emma fed and clothed and loved, something in him woke all the way up. Bill Reyes, the man who'd pulled him out of the fire and never let him say thank you. That's the job, Cross. Don't make it weird. He hadn't been giving Nathan a job. He'd been giving him back the one thing that had ever made him feel like himself. That old son of a... Nathan breathed, and he almost laughed, and his eyes stung. He set the whole thing up. He gave me a soldier, Victoria said, and told me he was a chauffeur. And then, for the first time since the day a wheel wouldn't turn on a bridge in the rain, Victoria Ellison smiled, a real smile, fierce and wet-eyed and alive. Marcus thinks I'm a broken woman in a chair with a driver he can wave off. He has no idea. He has no idea what just parked in my garage. Emma stirred on the couch, murmured something in her sleep, and both of them went quiet, watching the little girl settle. And in the hush that followed, Victoria's hand was still on Nathan's arm, and neither of them moved it, and neither of them mentioned it, and both of them knew that whatever this was, it had already stopped being a job somewhere back in that garage on that bridge, in the back of a parked car, where a proud woman had finally let herself fall apart in front of the one person who would never, ever call her crazy. We should let her sleep, Victoria said softly. Stay, both of you. It's late and it's safe here, and I have more rooms than I'll ever use. She hesitated, and then said the most honest thing Nathan had ever heard her say, quieter than the city, quieter than the child's breathing. And I don't want to be alone in this apartment tonight. Not tonight. Not knowing what I know. Nathan looked at his sleeping daughter, and at the woman whose brother had tried to murder her, and he understood that all three of them were in their own way people. The world had decided it was done with a widowed father, a paralyzed CEO. Everyone called crazy a motherless little girl who pretended not to hear her dad cry. 3 broken people in a room 40 floors above a city that had no idea any of them were still fighting. We'll stay, Nathan said, and downstairs in an office 30 floors below, a light was still on. Marcus Ellison sat at his desk with a glass of scotch and a phone pressed to his ear, and the voice on the other end said, The mechanic ran. We're cleaning the report tonight, but there's a problem. Your sister hired a new driver 3 weeks ago. And Marcus Ellison, who had taught himself not to feel anything about his sister a long time ago, took a slow sip of scotch and said, Drivers come and go. Fire him. and the voice said, "This one used to work Army logistics, investigations, the kind that figure out why things break." And for the first time in 14 months, Marcus Ellison set down his glass and felt something cold move through his chest that he hadn't felt since the night he made a phone call about a brake line, and he said very quietly, "Find out everything about him, everything, and find out about the little girl." The forensic audit went in at 8 a.m. on a Monday, buried in a stack of routine quarterly compliance requests, exactly as they'd planned, and for 6 days, nothing happened at all. That was the worst part, Nathan would think later. The waiting. He drove Victoria to her meetings, dropped Emma at school, picked her up, made dinner in the penthouse kitchen, because Victoria had quietly told Gloria to stock the fridge with the things a 7-year-old actually eats. And every night, the three of them sat at that enormous table like some strange assembled family, and underneath all of it a clock was ticking that only two of them could hear. On the 7th day, the clock stopped being quiet. Nathan was in the parking garage at 4 p.m., waiting for Victoria to come down from a board meeting when Gloria called him, and her voice was wrong, tight, and fast. "Nathan, where are you?" "Garage, waiting for the boss." "Why?" "There was a man here, at the front desk of the residence. He said he was from a courier company, delivering documents for Ms. Ellison, but the building manager didn't recognize the company, and when he asked for ID, the man just left. Nathan, he was asking which floor. He was asking whether a child had been staying here." Everything in Nathan went cold and clear at once. "Where's Emma?" "At school still. She's fine. She's at school." "Call the school. Right now. Tell them nobody picks her up but me. Nobody, not you, not a company car, nobody. Use the code word." He'd set up a code word in week 2, an old habit, a word only he and Emma and the school office knew. "Do it now, Gloria." He was already moving at the elevator, and Victoria was coming down in it, and one look at his face told her everything. "What happened?" she said. "They asked about Emma, at the building." He didn't soften it. There was no time to soften it. "A man came asking which floor, asking whether a child was staying here. Marcus knows about my daughter." The color went out of Victoria's face, and then something happened that Nathan would remember for the rest of his life. She didn't crumble. She didn't apologize. She went absolutely terrifyingly calm, and she said 4 words in a voice he'd never heard from her before. "Get in the car." They drove to the school in silence. Nathan taking corners hard, both hands on the wheel, checking every mirror. Gloria called back. The school had confirmed Emma was safe in the front office with the principal. No one had come. The code word was in place. Nathan felt the vice around his chest loosen half a turn, but only half. When they pulled up, Emma came out holding the principal's hand, confused but fine, and Nathan got out and knelt down and hugged her harder than he meant to. "Daddy, you're squishing me." "Sorry, baby." His voice was thick. "Sorry. Get in. We're gonna go home." But it was in the car with Emma buckled in the back next to Victoria that Nathan made his decision. And he made it fast, because that was what you did when the threat moved from the target to the family. You changed the whole board. "She can't stay in the city," Nathan said low, meeting Victoria's eyes in the mirror over Emma's head. "I have to get her out. Tonight. Somewhere Marcus can't reach and doesn't know to look." "Where?" Victoria asked. "My sister-in-law, my wife's sister, Colorado. They were never close. Marcus won't have her on any list. There's no paper trail connecting us. She's off the grid, quiet town. Emma loves her." He was already running the logistics in his head, the way he used to plan a convoy, every variable, every risk. "I put her on a plane tomorrow morning. I tell her it's a surprise vacation. She never knows anything was wrong." "Nathan?" Victoria's voice was very quiet. "If you send Emma to Colorado, you're staying to finish this. You understand that's what you're telling me. You're sending your daughter away so you can stay in the fight." Nathan looked at her in the mirror for a long moment. "I'm sending my daughter somewhere safe," he said, "so I can make the world safe enough to bring her back to. That's the whole job. It always has been." Emma, who had been listening the way children listen, picked exactly that moment to ask, "Am I going to see Aunt Katie for real?" And her face lit up with such pure, uncomplicated joy that both adults had to look away, because a 7-year-old's happiness in the middle of a murder conspiracy was almost more than either of them could bear. "For real, baby," Nathan said. "For real." He spent that night packing a small pink suitcase and pretending it was Christmas. He let Emma choose which stuffed animals came. He made her favorite dinner. And when she was asleep, he sat on the floor outside her door with his back against the wall, and Victoria wheeled up beside him, and neither of them spoke for a long time. "I did this," Victoria finally said. "I brought this to your door, to your daughter's door. 6 weeks ago you were a driver, and now your child is fleeing the state, and it's because I hired you, because I let you stay, because I was selfish, and I didn't want to be alone in that apartment." Her voice broke. "I should fire you tonight. I should give you money and send you both to Colorado and finish this myself. It's the only decent thing to do, and we both know it." Nathan turned his head and looked at her. "Do you want to know why I'm not going to let you do that?" "Because you don't quit. I know. You've told me." "No." He shook his head slowly. "Because for 3 years, Victoria, I have been nothing but a driver. I have been a man who got smaller and smaller and quieter, who let the whole world tell him that the only thing he was good for anymore was getting people from one place to another. And I believed them. I put the part of me that mattered in a box, and I told myself it was for Emma, that being safe and small and forgettable was how I kept her fed." His jaw tightened. "And then a man tried to murder you and everyone called you crazy, and I was the only person in the whole city who could look at a cut brake line and know the truth. For the first time since my wife died, I'm useful again. Not as a driver, as what I actually am." He met her eyes. "You didn't ruin my life by hiring me. You gave it back to me. So don't you dare take it away now to protect me. I don't need protecting. I need to finish this." Victoria stared at him, and her eyes were shining, and she didn't say anything because there was nothing to say to that. She just reached over in the dark hallway and took his hand, and they sat there together on the floor outside a sleeping child's door, two people who had both forgotten what it felt like to be seen holding on. Emma flew to Colorado the next morning. Nathan watched her go through security, holding her aunt's cheerful voice on the phone in one ear, and the memory of his wife in the other. And when the plane was in the air, he stood at the window for a long time, and then he turned around, and he was a different man. The father had done his job. Now, the investigator had work to do. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, the audit produced its first ghost. Victoria found it herself at 2 a.m, going through financial records with the obsessive focus of a woman who had run this company since she was 28 and knew where every dollar was supposed to live. Nathan was asleep on the couch. He'd more or less moved into the penthouse now, in a guest room, an arrangement neither of them discussed, when she wheeled in and shook him awake. "Nathan, wake up. Look at this." He came awake instantly, the way he always did. "What is it?" 18 months ago, 6 months before my crash, a shell company called Meridian Logistics received $400,000 from one of our subsidiaries. The payment was coded as a consulting fee. Meridian has no employees, no website, no address except a mailbox in Delaware. It received the money, and then 90 days later, it dissolved. Her hands were shaking on the laptop. "I've never heard of Meridian, but the payment was authorized by someone with executive signing authority, and the electronic signature," she looked up at him, "is mine." Nathan sat up fully. "Yours?" "It's my signature credential, my login, my authorization code. Except, I never signed it, Nathan. I have never heard of this company in my life. And 18 months ago, I was running this business 14 hours a day, and I would have remembered $400,000 going to a shell company I never heard of." Her voice climbed. "Someone used my credentials. Someone with access to my authorization codes." "Marcus," Nathan said quietly. "Marcus had them. As COO, he had emergency access to my credentials for exactly this reason, so the business could function if I was incapacitated." She laughed, and it was an awful sound. "He used the access I gave him for emergencies to pay for my murder 6 months before he committed it. He planned it. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. This wasn't a fight that got out of hand. He set up a shell company half a year in advance, He planned it. Nathan took the laptop gently and looked at the record, and something in his old training clicked into place cold and precise. 400,000 to a shell company that dissolves 90 days later. That's not a payment for one job. That's a retainer. That's how you pay a professional for ongoing work. You set up a clean pipe. You push money through it. You burn it when you're done. He looked up. Meridian is the pipe. The money went in one end. We need to find out who was standing at the other end. How? Follow it out. Money that goes into a shell doesn't evaporate. It goes somewhere, another account, a wire, a cash withdrawal. Every step leaves a mark. Victoria, this is exactly what I did for 10 years. This is a supply line. I don't care that it's dollars instead of ammunition. A supply line is a supply line, and every single one of them can be traced back to the source if you're patient and you know how to read it. He handed the laptop back. But we can't do it from inside the company. The second we start pulling on Meridian, if Marcus has any alerts set up, he'll know. We need someone outside, a forensic accountant who doesn't work for Ellison, who can subpoena the Delaware records, who can follow the money without touching your system. That means lawyers, Victoria said. That means going outside. That means people knowing. That means the right people knowing. Nathan leaned forward. You've spent 14 months keeping this secret because every time you said it out loud, someone called you crazy. But you're not crazy anymore, Victoria. You've got a shell company, a forged signature, and a mechanic who'll testify a brake line was cut. You don't need to whisper this anymore. You need to hand it to someone with a badge or a bar license and let them do what you can't do from a wheelchair in a company your brother controls. He held her eyes. It's time to stop hiding and start hunting in the open. But we do it smart, and we do it all at once so he can't run. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. And then she said something that told Nathan exactly how alone she'd been for 14 months. I don't have anyone to hand it to, she said softly. That's the thing no one understands about being where I am. I'm one of the most powerful people in this city, and I don't have a single person I can trust with my life. My lawyers work for the company Marcus controls. My board is full of people who profit when I disappear. My friends stopped calling after the crash because a woman in a wheelchair is depressing at parties. I have Gloria, who I pay. And I have you. Her voice cracked. For 14 months, the list of people I trust has been 0. And now it's 1, and he's a driver I met 6 weeks ago. So, Nathan looked at this woman. Brilliant, wealthy, powerful, and so profoundly alone that a 6-week acquaintance was the only person on earth she trusted, and he felt something break open in his chest. Then we start with 1, he said. 1's enough to start. I know a man, not a company man, federal. He's FBI Financial Crimes Division, and he's the most honest human being I've ever met, which is why he's 54 years old and still a field agent instead of running the division because he won't play the game. Nathan almost smiled. His name is Ray Delgado. We served together, sort of. He was the guy investigating the fraud on the contractor side while I was investigating the sabotage on the logistics side. We spent a year in the same hellhole learning to trust each other because nobody else would tell us the truth. If I call Ray Delgado and tell him a $2 billion CEO's brother forged her signature to pay a shell company to cut her brake line, he will not sleep until it's finished. I'd stake my life on it. I have staked my life on it. Victoria looked at him. You keep doing that. Every time I tell you the situation is impossible, you produce another person from your past who happens to be exactly what we need. A colonel, a private security contractor, now an FBI agent. Her eyes narrowed, but there was warmth under it. Who are you, Nathan Cross? I'm a guy who spent 10 years learning that the only thing that survives a war is who you trusted in it, Nathan said. I don't have money. I don't have a company. What I've got is a short list of people who'd walk into fire for me because I walked into fire for them. It's the only inheritance the Army gave me. And I'm about to spend all of it on you. He called Ray Delgado the next morning, and the conversation was short. And 48 hours later, a plain gray sedan pulled into the penthouse garage, and a heavy-set man in a cheap suit with kind, exhausted eyes got out, and Nathan met him with a handshake that turned into the kind of hug soldiers give. You look terrible, Cross, Ray Delgado said. You look worse. I've been an FBI agent for 26 years. Terrible is the uniform. Delgado looked past Nathan to where Victoria sat waiting, and his whole demeanor shifted into something professional and gentle at once. Ms. Ellison, Nathan told me the outline on the phone. I need you to understand something before we go 1 inch further. He pulled a chair over and sat down, so he was at her eye level, which Nathan noticed, and knew Victoria noticed too. If what Nathan told me is true, a forged authorization, a shell company, a tampered vehicle, an attempt on your life, then this isn't a corporate dispute. This is attempted murder and financial fraud crossing state lines, and it becomes federal and it becomes mine. But the moment I open this officially, there's no closing it. Your brother goes to prison or you're wrong and your family is destroyed either way. There's no version where this ends quietly. Are you prepared for that? Victoria didn't hesitate. He cut my brake line and held my hand in the hospital. There's nothing left to protect. Delgado studied her for a long moment, and then he nodded once. Okay, then here's how it works, and you're going to hate parts of it. He pulled out a notepad. I can't just arrest him on a shell company and a hunch. I need the chain. I need to prove the money went from your company through Meridian to a person, and I need to connect that person to the vehicle. The mechanic's testimony is gold, but a defense attorney will shred one scared mechanic. I need the money to corroborate him. And to get the money I need time, and I need you to do the hardest thing you'll ever do. He looked up. I need you to act normal. I need you to go to work, smile at your brother, sit across from him in meetings, and give absolutely no sign that you know anything. Because the second Marcus feels the floor move, he runs. Or worse, he accelerates. You said he already asked about the little girl. That means he's already thinking about pressure points. We cannot let him feel cornered until the cage is already closed. How long? Victoria asked. Weeks, maybe 2 months. I'll move as fast as the law lets me, but I do it clean because if I cut a corner, his lawyers walk him, and then he's free, and he's furious, and he knows you came after him. Delgado's voice was flat and serious. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. Right means slow. Slow means you have to look your brother in the eye every day and pretend you don't know he tried to kill you. Can you do that? And Nathan watched Victoria Ellison's face turn to stone, beautiful and terrible, and she said, I built a $2 billion company in a world that wanted me to be a secretary. I have been underestimated by better men than my brother my entire life. Watch me smile at him. For the next 3 weeks, she did. Nathan drove her to the office every morning and watched her transform in the elevator, watched the grief and the rage fold down into a smooth, executive calm, watched her walk roll into rooms with the man who'd tried to murder her and discuss quarterly projections in a level voice. It was Nathan thought the bravest thing he'd ever seen, and he'd seen men run into gunfire. Every night she came home shaking, and every night she held it together until the elevator doors closed, and then it came out of her in the dark, and Nathan learned to just be there, to not fix it, to hand her water and sit close and let her come back to herself. And in those 3 weeks, something else happened quietly in the spaces between the fear. They fell into each other. Not with any declaration, not with any single moment, but in the accumulation of 1,000 small ones, the way she started saving him the last of the coffee. The way he started knowing what she needed before she asked, the way they'd end up on the couch at midnight, going over Delgado's updates, and somehow end up talking about her mother, his wife, the versions of themselves that existed before the world broke them. One night, she told him about the crash, all of it, the way the wheel wouldn't turn, the sound, the guardrail made the 40 seconds she'd hung upside down, thinking about all the things she'd never said to anyone, because she'd been too busy being formidable. And Nathan told her about the transport truck outside Kandahar, the fire, Bill Rhea's hand grabbing his collar, and how he'd spent every day since wondering why he got to live when better men didn't. Maybe, Victoria said quietly in the dark, you lived so you'd be here now, so you'd be the one guy in Chicago who could look at my car and know the truth. Nathan didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, That's the first thing anyone's ever said that made the surviving feel like it meant something. He almost kissed her that night. He didn't because Emma's face was in his mind, and his wife's, and because some part of him still felt like loving anyone again was a door he wasn't allowed to walk through. But Victoria saw it the almost, and she didn't push, and something settled between them that was patient and certain, and unspoken, and stronger for being unspoken. Delgado's calls got more frequent and more electric. The money had moved from Meridian to a numbered account in Nevada, from Nevada to a man, a name. And the name made Nathan go very still when Delgado said it over the phone on a Wednesday afternoon, because it was the man from the church, steps the man with the patient smile who'd known Danny's daughter's bus route. His name is Kurt Halloran, Delgado said. Ex-military dishonorable discharge, spent the last decade doing security consulting for people who need problems to disappear. He's the mechanic. He's the guy who cut the line. And Nathan, his phone records show a call to Marcus Ellison's private cell the night before the crash, and another one the day the mechanic filed the fake report. We've got the money going to Halloran, and we've got Halloran talking to Marcus. The chain is almost complete. Almost, Nathan said. What's missing? Intent. Connection to the act. I can prove Marcus paid a bad man who cut the brakes. A good defense attorney says Marcus hired security consulting, had no idea what Halloran did. It's all coincidence and shell games. I need one piece that puts the crime in Marcus's own mouth. A recording, an email, something where he says it. And men like Marcus don't say it. They're too smart. Delgado paused. Unless we make him say it, unless we give him a reason to think he has to act, and we're listening when he does. Nathan felt the cold clarity settle over him, the old feeling, the plan assembling itself. You want to spook him, controlled. Make him think the walls are closing so he calls Halloran and you're on the line when he does. It's the fastest way. It's also the most dangerous because a spooked Marcus is a Marcus who might do something to his sister, or to a little girl in Colorado. Delgado's voice was grave. I won't do it without her consent, and I won't do it without a protection detail on the child. But Nathan, it's the play. It's the only play that ends with him in prison instead of walking free and knowing she came for him. That night, Nathan laid it all out for Victoria at the kitchen table, every piece Halloran. The phone calls, the plan to provoke Marcus into a recorded confession. And Victoria listened without a word, her face perfectly still, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long time. There's a board meeting Friday, she finally said. A big one. Marcus is going to move to have me declared medically unfit to serve as CEO. I've known it was coming for a week. He's been lining up the votes. He thinks Friday is the day he finally takes the company. Her eyes came up to Nathan's, and there was something incandescent in them. What if I don't wait for you to spook him? What if I do it myself Friday in that room in front of the whole board? What if I let him make his move, let him stand up and tell everyone I'm broken and unfit and finished, and then I look him in the eye and I tell him I know about Meridian. Just that word, just Meridian. And Agent Delgado is listening, and we watch what a cornered man does when his own sister says the one word that means she found the pipe. Nathan stared at her. Victoria, that's if he panics in that room in public with 100 things that could go wrong. He won't do anything in the room. He's too controlled. He'll smile and adjourn the meeting and go somewhere private and pick up his phone and call Kurt Halloran to clean it up. She leaned forward, and she had never looked more alive, more like the woman who'd built an empire. And that's the call Delgado's been waiting for. I don't hand this to the FBI from a wheelchair in the dark, Nathan. I take my company back in the light in front of the men who wrote me off, and I make my brother hang himself with one word. That's how this ends. Not with me hiding, with me winning. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, and he understood that this was who she'd been before the crash. Before the chair, before 14 months of being called crazy. A woman who walked toward the fight, not away from it. And he understood something else. Something that scared him more than the plan. He was in love with her, completely. And on Friday, he was going to have to watch her walk into a room and say one word that might get her killed, and he was going to have to let her, because taking that away from her would be the one thing that would actually break her. Okay, Nathan said quietly. Friday. But I'm in that building. I'm 10 feet from that door. and Halloran doesn't get within a mile of you or Emma, I don't care what it takes." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You take your company back. I'll keep you alive while you do it. That's the deal." Victoria turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his, and for a moment the fear and the plan and the brother and the whole impossible weight of it fell away. And it was just the two of them at a kitchen table at midnight. Two broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage. "When this is over," Victoria said softly, "I want to bring Emma home. I want her to come back to a world where it's safe. And I want—" She stopped, and her voice wavered, and the formidable CEO was gone, and it was just a woman who'd been alone a very long time. "I don't know how to say the rest of it without sounding foolish." "Then don't say it yet," Nathan said gently. "Say it Friday night, when it's done. Say it to me then." She nodded and held his hand and didn't let go. And 30 floors below them, in an office with a single light burning, Marcus Ellison sat looking at a photograph that Kurt Halloran had slid across his desk an hour earlier. A photograph taken through a long lens of a little girl with a pink suitcase, walking through an airport, holding a woman's hand. On the back, in Halloran's blocky handwriting, was written a single line: Denver. Aunt Catherine Reyes, 1400 Pinecrest, Silver Creek, CO. And Marcus Ellison looked at the photograph of Nathan Cross's daughter for a very long time, and then he picked up his phone, and he did not call to have anyone hurt. Not yet. He called his assistant, and he said in a voice as smooth as glass, "Move Friday's board meeting up to tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Tell them it's urgent. Tell them it's about my sister's health." He set the phone down. Let's see how ready she really is. The call came at 6:40 the next morning, and it changed everything, because Marcus had moved the board meeting up a full day, and none of them were ready. Gloria's voice was breathless on the phone. "Nathan, the meeting's been moved. 8 a.m. today, not Friday. Marcus called an emergency session. He's telling the board it's about Victoria's health. It's happening in 90 minutes. Nathan was out of the guest room and knocking on Victoria's door before Gloria finished the sentence. "Victoria, wake up." He moved it. She opened the door, already awake, already dressed, already gray. "I heard. Gloria called me too." Her hands were steady, but her voice wasn't not quite. "He moved it up a day. He knows something, Nathan. He doesn't move fast. He never moves fast. He's the most patient man I've ever met. If he's moving fast, it means he's scared. And if he's scared, then the plan still works," Nathan said, gripping her shoulders, forcing his own fear down where she couldn't see it. "A scared man makes the call. That's what we want. But I have to reach Delgado right now because if the meeting's in 90 minutes, he needs a warrant to be listening, and warrants take time we don't have." He called Ray Delgado, and Delgado picked up on the first ring, and the news was bad. "I can't get the wire up in 90 minutes, Nathan. It's not possible. A Title III intercept takes a judge, and I've got the affidavit ready, but no judge signs a wiretap before 9 a.m. on a Thursday. If she walks into that room and drops the word, and Marcus makes the call, I won't be on the line. We'll have provoked him with nothing to catch him." Nathan closed his eyes. "Then we don't drop the word." "Nathan?" Victoria's voice behind him, flat and certain. "Give me the phone." He handed it to her. "Agent Delgado, it's Victoria Ellison. Listen to me carefully. My brother moved this meeting because he's frightened, and a frightened Marcus is more dangerous to my family than a confident one, which means the clock just started whether we like it or not. If I walk in there and play scared, he takes the company today, declares me unfit, and once he controls everything, he has no reason to keep me alive, and no reason to leave a little girl in Colorado alone. Waiting is not safer. Waiting is how we lose." She took a breath. "So here's what we're going to do. I'm not going to say Meridian. I'm going to do something better. I'm going to win the vote. I'm going to walk into that room and destroy his motion to remove me in front of the entire board publicly completely so that he loses his one clean path to the company. And a man who loses his clean path reaches for his dirty one. He'll call Halloran within the hour, not because I spooked him with a word, But because I took away the legal way and left him only the illegal one, and that gives you your whole day to get the wire up before he calls. There was a silence on the line. Then Delgado said slowly, "That's actually smarter. You beat him in the open, you close the legal door, and desperation does our work on a timeline we control instead of his." "I've been beating men in boardrooms for 15 years, Victoria said. "It's the crash that made everyone forget I know how to fight. Get your warrant, have the wire up by noon. I'll have him losing by 9. She hung up and handed Nathan back the phone, and for a moment he just looked at her. This woman who 90 seconds ago had been gray with fear and was now cold and sharp as a blade, and he understood that the fear had never been weakness. The fear was just the tax she paid before she went to war. "You're incredible," he said, and he meant it with his whole chest. "Get me to that building," she said. "And Nathan, the little girl. If Marcus is frightened, Emma's exposure just went up too. Call your sister-in-law. Get them somewhere Halloran can't find." Nathan's blood ran cold because he'd been so focused on the meeting he hadn't checked, and he pulled up Katie's number and called, and it rang and it rang, and it went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. And a splinter of pure terror went into his heart, and he texted Katie, "Call me right now, it's urgent. Is Emma with you?" And he made himself breathe because it was 5:40 in the morning in Colorado, and of course she was asleep. Of course they both were. There was no reason to panic, no reason at all. "She's asleep," Victoria said, watching his face. "It's Dawn there. She's asleep, Nathan." "Yeah," Nathan said. "Yeah, let's go." They drove to the building in the gray morning light, and Nathan called Katie twice more from the road and got voicemail twice more, and told himself the story. Every parent tells themselves. She left her phone in the kitchen. She's a heavy sleeper. Emma's fine. Emma's absolutely fine. And underneath it, a wire of dread pulled tighter and tighter. Victoria worked in the back seat, not on projections now, but on votes, texting board members, calling in 15 years of favors, and fear rebuilding in 90 minutes, an alliance her brother thought he'd dismantled while she was busy being broken. Nathan listened to her turn from a grieving woman into a force of nature, and it should have thrilled him, and it did. But half his mind was in a small house in Colorado where a phone kept ringing into silence. They reached the building at 7:50. Nathan pulled into the garage and Victoria transferred herself to her chair, and before she rolled to the elevator, she reached up and grabbed his hand hard. "Whatever happens up there," she said, "whatever he says about me, whatever the vote is, don't come in. Stay by the door. Be the exit, not the fight. If it goes wrong, your job isn't to save the meeting. It's to get me out and get to Emma. Do you understand me?" "I understand." "Say it. Get you out. Get to Emma. I understand." She held his eyes 1 second longer, and then she rolled toward the elevator and was gone up to the 30th floor, into a room full of men who'd already decided she was finished. Nathan stood in the garage and called Katie again. Voicemail. And this time, he didn't tell himself the story. This time, he called Delgado. "Ray, my sister-in-law's not answering. 6 calls since last night, all voicemail. Emma's with her in Colorado. I need eyes on that house, and I need them now." Delgado's voice sharpened instantly. "Give me the address." 1400 Pinecrest, Silver Creek, Colorado. Catherine Reyes. My daughter Emma, 7 years old. Pink suitcase. She's Ray. She's 7. I'm calling Denver field office right now. Local PD does a welfare check within the hour. Nathan, listen to me, don't spin out. There's 100 reasons a phone goes unanswered. Stay where you are. Keep your head. I'll call you the second I know anything. A pause. You've got a job in that building. Do the job. I've got Colorado. Nathan hung up and stood in the garage and did the hardest thing he'd ever done, which was nothing. He waited. He was the exit. He stayed by the door. Upstairs, at 8:04, the meeting began. Nathan would learn what happened in that room later in pieces from Victoria, and from the recording, Delgado eventually pulled. And every time he heard it, he understood a little more why he'd fallen in love with her. Marcus stood up first. Smooth, sorrowful, perfect. He told the board that it grieved him beyond words to do this, that his sister was a giant of the industry and the finest woman he knew. But that 14 months after a catastrophic accident, it was time for her own good, and the companies to acknowledge that she could no longer bear the burden of leadership. He had doctors' letters. He had a transition plan. He had the votes, he thought. He spoke for 10 minutes about love and duty and hard choices, and it was a masterpiece. And Nathan would think later that the most chilling thing about Marcus Ellison was how much he seemed to believe himself. And then Victoria spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She thanked her brother for his concern, and then she calmly, systematically, in 11 minutes, dismantled him. She presented the last 4 quarters numbers she'd been quietly driving from the back of a car while everyone thought she was broken. She revealed 3 major deals she'd personally closed in the last 2 months that the board didn't even know about, because Marcus had been keeping her contributions quiet. She read the names of the board members Marcus had privately promised positions to in exchange for their votes one by one, watching each man go pale as she said his name, letting the whole room understand that she knew exactly what deal each of them had cut. And then she called the vote herself before Marcus could, and she looked around the table and said, "You can vote to remove the woman who built this company and just posted its best quarter in 3 years on the word of a man who's been promising you my chair. Or you can vote to keep the CEO who's been winning this whole time while you weren't looking. Raise your hand if you want me gone. Look me in the eye and raise it." Not one hand went up. Marcus Ellison lost the company in his own emergency meeting in front of the men he'd bribed, and he lost it to the sister he'd tried to murder, and he did it without ever raising his voice, because Victoria had understood something he hadn't, that the board didn't care about her health. They cared about winning. And she was winning. And men who are winning don't need your legs. At 8:31, the meeting adjourned, and Nathan, still in the garage, got a text from Victoria that was one word: done. He lost. Everyone gone. And then 10 seconds later, he didn't say a word to me, just looked at me and smiled and left. Nathan. He smiled. Nathan's blood went cold because he knew that smile. He'd seen it on the church steps. It was the smile of a man reaching for his dirty option. And at 8:33 his phone rang, and it was Colorado, and it was Katie. "Nathan." She was crying, and the sound of it stopped his heart. "Nathan, I'm so sorry I fell asleep on the couch. My phone was in the car. I just saw Nathan. Someone was here. Last night. There was a man. He came to the door around 11. He said he was from a delivery company. He had a package for Emma Cross by name, and I told him there was no one here by that name, and I shut the door, and I've been up all night with the lights off and a knife, and I didn't call the police because I didn't want to leave Emma alone, even for a second, and my phone was in the Ocean. Katie." Nathan's voice was a blade. "Is Emma with you right now? Is she in the house right now, in the room with you?" Yes, she's asleep. She's right here on the couch. I didn't let her out of my sight. She's fine, Nathan. She's fine. But that man knew her name. How did he know her? Get her in the car, right now while we're talking. Don't pack. Don't get her shoes, wrap her in a blanket, and put her in the car, and drive to the Silver Creek police station, and go inside, and don't leave until I call you. There are officers coming, FBI is coming, but I want you moving before they get there. Move, Katie. Move now." He heard her moving, heard her lift. Emma. Heard Emma's sleepy, confused voice. Aunt Katie, Daddy, and Nathan pressed his hand against his own mouth to keep from making a sound, because his daughter's voice 3 states away, sleepy and safe and alive, was the best and most terrible thing he'd ever heard. "Put her on," he said, "just for a second." Shuffling. Then, "Daddy." "Hey, baby." His voice cracked completely. "Hey, you having fun with Aunt Katie?" "It's still nighttime, Daddy. Why is it nighttime?" "I know, baby. You're gonna go on a little car ride with Aunt Katie. Okay? It's a special adventure. And I'll see you real soon. I promise. I love you more than anything in the whole world, you know that? Love you too. Can I go back to sleep in the car?" "Yeah, baby. You go back to sleep. Aunt Katie's got you." The phone went back to Katie. and Nathan told her low and fast. That man was Halloran, or Halloran's man. He came last night to confirm she was there. He's coming back, or he's already close. Get to the police station. I'm calling the FBI right now. They'll meet you there. Don't stop for anyone. Don't roll down the window for anyone. Not a cop car. Nobody until you're inside that station. Go. He hung up and called Delgado, and it was already ringing before he finished dialing. Ray, confirmed. Halloran's man was at the house last night. She's moving Emma to Silver Creek PD right now. I need protection on that station, and I need it before she gets there. Already done, Delgado said grimly. Denver field office has 2 agents rolling to Silver Creek as we speak. Local PD is expecting her. Nathan, this is good and bad. Good because Emma's about to be behind a police desk with federal protection. Bad because Halloran sending a man to confirm the child's location last night means Marcus armed his dirty option before the meeting. He wasn't reacting to losing. He was ready to lose. He set the child up as leverage in advance. Delgado's voice dropped. And the wire's up. I got the judge an hour ago. As of 11 minutes ago, I am legally listening to Marcus Ellison's private cell. So if he's going to call Halloran, he's going to do it now, and I'm going to hear every word. Nathan gripped the phone. Then Victoria did exactly what she said. She took his clean option. He's got nothing left but Halloran and a little girl. And a sister he still needs gone, Delgado said. Nathan, where's Victoria right now? Nathan's head came up. Upstairs. Meeting's over, everyone's gone. She texted me. She's alone on the 30th floor. Alone. Delgado's voice went very flat. Nathan. Marcus left that meeting, smiled at his sister, and walked away. He's a man who just lost everything legal and has a professional on retainer and a sister sitting alone 30 floors up. Get to her. Get to her right now. Nathan was already running. He hit the elevator, and it was slow, agonizingly slow, 30 floors, and he watched the numbers climb, and his heart hammered, and his mind ran every scenario, and at floor 18, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Marcus came back. He's here. He wants to talk. Says just the 2 of us. And Nathan typed, do not. Get out. Elevator. Now. And watched it say delivered, and watched it not say read. And the elevator crawled past 19 past 20, and he wanted to scream. At floor 22, Delgado called back, and his voice was electric with adrenaline. He's on the phone, Marcus. He's calling Halloran right now. I'm listening, Nathan? He just said it. He just said, the Colorado piece is in position. Use it if you have to, but the sister is the priority. She's alone up here right now, and this is the window. Nathan, we've got it. We've got him on tape ordering it, but he's going to do something. He's up there with her, right now. The elevator hit 30. The doors opened. Nathan came out fast and low and silent, and the 30th floor was empty and quiet. Glass and hush, and he moved toward the boardroom, and he heard voices, 2 voices, and he stopped just outside the door, where they couldn't see him, and he listened because Delgado's voice was in his ear saying, don't burst in. We need him talking. We need the confession. Let him talk. And Nathan stood against the wall outside the boardroom with his heart in his throat and made himself listen to the man who'd tried to kill the woman he loved. Never wanted it to come to this, Vic. Marcus's voice, and it was soft, almost tender, and that was the worst part. You have to know that. I loved you. I still love you. But you never once in your entire life made room for me. Dad built this for both of us, and you took all of it, and you never even noticed you were doing it. You just assumed. You always assumed you were the one who mattered. So you cut my brake line. Victoria's voice, and it was steady, and Nathan realized with a jolt of terror and pride that she was keeping him talking on purpose, that she'd figured out the same thing Delgado had, that she was buying the confession with her own life as collateral. You planned it 6 months ahead. Meridian. $400,000. My own signature. A silence. Then Marcus laughed, quiet and awful. So you did find it. I wondered. The audit. Another silence. You were always smarter than me, Vic. That was the whole problem. I could plan a murder 6 months out, and you could still find it from a wheelchair everyone said was your grave. His voice changed, hardened, and Nathan felt every muscle in his body coil. It doesn't matter now. There's a man on his way to a police station in Colorado where your driver's little girl is about to be. And there's you and me in this room. And I'm going to tell you how the next 10 minutes go. Marcus, you're going to call your driver, and you're going to tell him to stand down, to walk away, to take whatever settlement I offer, and disappear, or the man in Colorado does what he's paid to do. And then you and I are going to go back to being a family, and you're going to sign the company to me quietly over the next year for health reasons, and nobody gets hurt. Or... His voice dropped to nothing. The man in Colorado doesn't get a phone call telling him to stop. Your choice, Vic. It was always your choice. You just never made room. And Nathan Cross, standing outside that door with his daughter's life in one hand and the woman he loved in the other, heard Delgado's voice in his ear say tight and fast, "We've got it. We've got the confession. We've got Colorado on tape. Denver's got 2 agents pulling into that police station. Right now. Emma's covered, Nathan. Emma is covered. Go." And Nathan went. He came through the boardroom door, not like a driver, and not like a soldier, bursting a room, but like something in between, fast and controlled and absolutely silent. And Marcus Ellison spun around. And for one frozen second, the 2 men looked at each other. The COO, who'd bought a murder, and the driver who'd spent 10 years learning how murders were built. And Marcus's hand moved toward his jacket, and Nathan crossed the room before the hand got there, and he had Marcus's wrist, and then Marcus's arm, and then Marcus face down over the $2 billion table with his arm bent up behind his back, and it took 4 seconds and Nathan didn't even breathe hard. "There's nothing in the jacket," Nathan said quietly, patting him down with his free hand. "You're not a gun guy, Marcus. You're a phone call guy. You pay other people to touch the blood." He leaned down close. "Your man in Colorado is walking into 2 FBI agents right now. My daughter is behind a police desk. And every word you just said to your sister is on an FBI wire. It's over. You lost the company at 8, and you lost everything else at 8:33. Marcus went completely still against the table. "Who are you?" he breathed. "You're a driver." And Victoria Ellison, sitting in her chair 3 feet away, watching the brother who'd tried to murder her pinned to the table by the man she'd hired to drive her, said in a voice that shook with 14 months of vindication, "No, Marcus. He's not. He never was. Colonel Reyes didn't send me a driver." She rolled forward until she was looking down at her brother's face pressed against the table. "He sent me the one man in America who could prove what you did. And you shook his hand in this building, and you never even looked at him because he was just the help, just the driver, just someone who didn't matter." Her voice cracked and steadied. "You spent your whole life not making room for the people who mattered, Marcus. And it's the driver who ends you." The elevator chimed, and Ray Delgado came onto the 30th floor with 4 agents and a warrant, and it was in the end quiet. There was no gunfire, no chase. There was just a heavy-set FBI agent reading Marcus Ellison his rights, while another agent's phone rang with the Denver field office confirming that a man named Kurt Halloran had been taken into custody 2 blocks from the Silver Creek police station, and that a 7-year-old girl named Emma and her aunt were safe inside drinking hot chocolate. A deputy had gotten them from the machine, entirely unharmed, entirely unaware. Nathan stood by the window while they took Marcus away, and Victoria rolled up beside him, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. His phone buzzed. A photo from Katie. Emma, wrapped in a police station blanket, holding a paper cup of cocoa, grinning her gap-toothed grin at the camera safe. Nathan looked at it, and 14 months of another man's evil, and 3 years of his own grief, and 6 weeks of the most terrifying, alive, purposeful days he'd lived since the war. All came up his throat at once, and he put his hand over his eyes, and he wept silently. The way he wept when he thought Emma was asleep. And Victoria Ellison reached up and took his other hand and held it, and didn't tell him it was okay, and didn't fix it, and just stayed the way he'd stayed for her in a parked car in a garage 6 weeks and a lifetime ago. "She's safe," Victoria said softly. "You did it. She's safe and I'm safe, and it's over." Nathan wiped his face and looked down at her, at this woman who'd walked into a room full of enemies and won her life back with nothing but her mind, who'd kept a murderer talking with her own life as the bait, so an FBI wire could catch him, who was without any question the bravest and most formidable person he had ever known. "It's not over," he said quietly. She looked up at him, suddenly uncertain. "What do you mean? You said that night at the kitchen table that there was something you didn't know how to say without sounding foolish. And I told you to say it Friday night, when it was done." He turned to face her fully, and he held both her hands in his, and for once the driver, the soldier, the widower, the father, all of it fell away, and he was just a man looking at a woman. "It's not Friday. He moved the meeting up a day, so I guess we're ahead of schedule." And Victoria Ellison, who had faced down a boardroom and a murderer without flinching, looked up at Nathan Cross, and for the first time looked afraid. "When you almost kissed me," she said very quietly, 3 weeks ago, and you stopped. I need to know why you stopped. Because if it was because of Emma, or because of your wife, I understand and I'll never bring it up again, and we can just be whatever we are. But if it was because you thought I couldn't—" Her voice broke, and her hand pressed against her own leg. The old gesture, the leg that couldn't feel, "Because of the chair, because of this." "Then I need you to say it, because I have spent 14 months watching every person in my life decide I was less, and I couldn't bear it. Not from you, anyone but you." And Nathan Cross knelt down in front of her wheelchair, so that for once he was looking up at her instead of down, and he took her face in both his hands, and he said the truest thing he had ever said in his life. "I stopped," he said, "because I was scared. Not of the chair. Never once of the chair. I was scared because the last time I loved someone this much, I lost her, and I didn't know if I could survive doing that twice." He brushed his thumb across her cheek. "But I watched you today. I watched you walk into a room full of men who wrote you off and take back everything they stole. And I watched you sit across from your own brother and let him confess to your murder to save my daughter and Victoria." His voice broke completely. "You are the strongest, most alive, most whole person I have ever known. There is not one thing about you that's less. The chair is just where you're sitting. It's not who you are. Who you are is the woman who was right when the whole world called her crazy. Who you are is the person I'm in love with. Completely. And I'm done being scared of it." And Victoria Ellison, who could not feel her legs, felt her whole body come alive anyway, and she leaned down as he leaned up and in an empty boardroom, 30 floors above a city that had no idea. With her brother in handcuffs in an elevator, and his daughter safe with a cup of cocoa 3 states away, 2 broken people who had found each other in the wreckage finally stopped being afraid. When they broke apart, both of them were crying and both of them were laughing, and Victoria pressed her forehead against his and whispered, "I trust you. Do you understand what that means coming from me? I haven't trusted one single person in 14 months, and I trust you with my life. I already did. I bet it on you today." "You did," Nathan said, "and you won." "We won," she said. Down in the garage, Ray Delgado leaned against his gray sedan and let 2 of his agents handle the paperwork, and he watched the numbers over the elevator and thought about Bill Reyes, that crazy old colonel who'd called him a month ago and said, "Ray, I sent Cross into something. I think it's going to get big. When it does, and it will be ready to pick up the phone." Delgado hadn't asked how Reyes knew. Reyes always knew. And he pulled out his own phone and dialed. And when the old man picked up, Delgado just said, "It's done. He's in cuffs. The girl's safe. And Ray Cross is himself again. You should have seen him." And 3,000 miles away, an old soldier who'd once walked into fire to pull a younger man out closed his eyes and said, "I know, I always knew. He just needed someone worth walking into the fire for again." A pause. "Tell him to call his daughter. And tell him—" The old man's voice went rough. "Tell him he can finally say thank you now. He earned it." The trial took 11 months, and Nathan Cross was in the courtroom for every single day of it. Not as a witness, though he was that too. As the man who sat in the second row directly behind Victoria's wheelchair, close enough that all she had to do was reach back, and his hand would already be there. Marcus Ellison's defense team was the best money could buy, and money could buy a great deal, and for 11 months they tried every door. They argued the wire was improperly obtained. They argued Danny Alvarez was a disgruntled employee. They argued Kurt Halloran had acted alone. They put Marcus on the stand and let him weep about his love for his sister and the tragedy of a family torn apart by paranoia. And every argument broke on the same rock because Ray Delgado had built the case the way Nathan had taught him a war was won one clean link at a time. The money from Ellison Corp. To Meridian. Meridian to the Nevada account. Nevada to Halloran. Halloran's calls to Marcus. And at the center of all of it, the recording Marcus's own voice in that empty boardroom, soft and tender and monstrous, telling his sister how the next 10 minutes would go, telling her about the man in Colorado, telling her it was always her choice. A jury listened to a man calmly explain to his paralyzed sister how he would have a child killed to keep his hold on her company, and there was nothing. 11 months, and the best lawyers in the country could do about the sound of his own voice. The day the verdict came, Victoria reached back before the foreman even spoke, and Nathan's hand was already there. Guilty, on all counts. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and the one that Nathan would remember, the one for the man in Colorado, the count that carried Emma's name in the language of the law, conspiracy to commit the murder of a minor. When the judge read the sentence, Marcus Ellison did not weep. He turned around in his chair and looked at his sister for a long moment, and then he looked past her at Nathan, at the driver, and Nathan looked back and did not look away, and it was Marcus who broke first. It was Marcus who dropped his eyes. The man who'd never made room, unable at the very end to hold the gaze of the one he'd dismissed. They led him out, and Victoria did not watch him go. She turned in her chair to face Nathan instead, and she said quietly, "It's done." "It's done," Nathan agreed. 14 months of everyone telling me I was crazy. 11 months of trial. And it comes down to 2 words from 12 strangers. Her hand tightened in his. "Do you know what I felt when they said guilty? I thought I'd feel triumph or grief. He's my brother. I taught him to ride a bike." She was quiet a moment. "I didn't feel either one. I felt tired, and then I felt your hand. And I realized the only thing I actually cared about in that whole room was that your hand was there." She looked up at him. "That's when I knew for sure." "Knew what?" "That I want to marry you. That I've wanted it for months, and I was waiting for it to be over so it wouldn't be tangled up in all of this. So it could just be about you and me." She almost laughed at herself. "I'm proposing to you in a courtroom. This is insane." Nathan knelt down in front of her chair the way he always did now, so they'd be eye to eye. "You're not proposing to me in a courtroom," he said, "because I already bought the ring 4 months ago, and I've been carrying it around waiting for the same thing. For it to be over, so it could just be us." He pulled the small box out of his jacket, the jacket that used to be the scratched leather one, and was now something a little better, because his life was a little better, and he opened it. "You beat me to it by about 10 seconds. You always were faster than me." And Victoria Ellison in the emptying courtroom, with her brother's footsteps still echoing down the hall, laughed and cried at the same time, and said yes, and the bailiff and the court reporter who had watched 11 months of the worst of human beings got to watch for once the best of them. They were married 4 months later, and Emma was the flower girl, and she took the job with the deadly seriousness of an 8-year-old who has decided something matters. She'd come home from Colorado 2 days after Marcus's arrest, and Nathan had been terrified about how to explain any of it. And in the end, he'd explained almost none of it. Because Emma, in the way of children, had understood the only part that mattered without being told. She'd walked into the penthouse, seen Victoria, and run to her, and climbed into her lap without asking the way she had the very first day, and Victoria had wrapped her arms around the little girl, and looked at Nathan over her head, with an expression that broke his heart and rebuilt it in the same second. "Are you going to be my mom now?" Emma had asked, just like that, the way children ask the enormous questions. And Victoria, who had spent 14 months believing she was less, believing the world was done with her, believing no one would ever look at the woman in the chair and see anything but the chair, had held the motherless daughter of the man she loved and said in a voice that shook, "If you'll let me, I'd like that more than anything in the whole world." "Okay," Emma had said, satisfied, and reached for the tablet. "Can we play the game with the cookies now?" And that had been that. That was how a family was made. Not with a ceremony, though the ceremony came later. It was made in a penthouse living room by an 8-year-old who decided with the certainty adults lose that this was her family now, and never once looked back. The company changed after that, and it changed because Victoria changed it. She could have sold it. Half the board expected her to, after everything expected her to take the money and disappear somewhere warm, and never think about the building where her brother had confessed to her murder. Instead, she walked into the first board meeting after the trial, and she looked around the table at the men who had almost voted to remove her, the men who had cut deals with Marcus, and she did not fire them, though she could have. She did something worse. She kept them, and she made them watch. "We're going to become a different company," she told them. "Not because it's good marketing, though it will be. Because I spent 14 months as a woman in a wheelchair that this entire industry decided was finished. I know now from the inside exactly how this world treats the people it's decided don't matter. The disabled, the overlooked, the help." She'd let that word sit in the room and watch the men who'd never once looked at her driver shift in their seats. "So we're going to build the most accessible workplace in this country. Not a ramp and a parking spot and a press release. Every level, every hire, every promotion. We are going to become the company that sees the people everyone else decides don't matter. And any one of you who can't get behind that is welcome to resign today, and I'll write you a generous check and you can go be small somewhere else." Not one of them resigned. Some because they were cowards, and some Nathan thought watching from the back of the room where he still liked to stand because they'd actually learned something. It was hard to sit in a room where a woman in a wheelchair had taken back everything from the man who tried to kill her and not learned something about who you'd underestimated. Danny Alvarez came back to Chicago 6 months after the trial, once it was safe, once Halloran and Marcus were both behind bars for a very long time. Victoria gave him a job, a real one, running the entire fleet maintenance division, with a salary that let his 3 kids stop worrying about anything at all. Danny had cried in her office and tried to apologize again for the 14 months of silence, and Victoria had stopped him. "You were a father protecting his children," she'd said. "You were afraid because being afraid was the correct response to men who knew your daughter's bus route. There's no shame in it. You kept the copy. When the day came, you told the truth. That's all anyone can ask of a frightened man, Danny. That when the day finally comes, he tells the truth." She'd paused. "It's what Nathan told you in the garage, isn't it? That silence isn't protection. It's just the waiting room." "He said exactly that," Danny had said, word for word. "He's usually right about things like that," Victoria had said. "It's very annoying." And Colonel Bill Reyes came to the wedding. He was older than Nathan remembered. Grayer, moving slower, but the eyes were the same. And when Nathan saw him across the room, something came up in his chest that he'd been carrying for 17 years. He crossed the room and stood in front of the old man. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. And then Nathan started to speak, and his voice failed him completely. "Don't," Reyes said gruffly. "Don't you dare. You've been trying to say it for 17 years, and I've never let you, and I'm not going to start now." "You have to let me," Nathan said. "You set this whole thing up. You sent me to her. You knew what she was dealing with, and you knew what I used to be. And you gave me my whole life back. Emma has a mother again. I have a—" His voice broke. "You did that. You reached into a truck on fire and pulled me out 17 years ago, and I never got to say it, and then you did it again from 3,000 miles away with a phone call, and you're telling me I still can't say it." And Colonel Bill Reyes, who had spent a lifetime refusing to be thanked, looked at the man he'd twice pulled out of the fire, and his own eyes were wet, and he said, all right, Cross. Just this once. Say it." "Thank you," Nathan said, "for all of it. Thank you." "You're welcome," the old man said quietly. And it was the first time in his life Nathan had heard him accept it, And then Reyes gripped his shoulder hard and said rough again, covering, "Now stop crying at your own wedding, you're embarrassing the uniform," and pulled him into an embrace that said everything the words never had. The rehabilitation had never stopped. Through all of it, the investigation and the trial and the wedding, Victoria had gone 3 times a week, the one appointment she never canceled, and Nathan drove her to every single one, though he was her husband now and not her driver, because she liked that he drove her, because the car had become the place where they figured things out, where they had, from the very beginning, told each other the truth. The doctors still said might, they always said might. And Victoria had made a kind of peace with the chair, somewhere in the middle of everything, had stopped measuring her life by whether she'd walk, had built a company and a marriage and a family from exactly where she sat. And then 14 months after the wedding, on an ordinary Tuesday at a rehab appointment like 1,000 others, it happened. She was between the parallel bars where she went through the motions 3 times a week, the way she had for years going through them. Not because she believed anymore, but because giving up the appointment felt like giving up the last small argument with a world that had told her no. Nathan was in the corner, where he always sat, half watching, half on his phone, with a work thing. And the therapist was saying the things she always said, and Victoria pushed up onto her arms, and set her feet, the way she'd set them 1,000 pointless times, and shifted her weight forward the way she always did, into legs that had felt nothing for years, and her right leg held. For 1 second. For 1 single, impossible second, her right leg took her weight and held, and she stood on her own between the bars, and the whole room went absolutely silent. "Victoria," the therapist breathed, "don't move. Don't do it again. Can you do it again?" And Victoria Ellison, who had been told might for years, who had made peace with never, who had built an entire magnificent life from a seated position, looked across the room at her husband, whose phone had clattered to the floor, who was already on his feet, whose face had come apart completely, and she stood again. On purpose. She stood, and this time she knew she was standing. This time she felt the effort and the weight and the impossible, and she stood there shaking between the bars, with her whole life burning bright behind her eyes, and she looked at Nathan, and she said in a voice that shattered on every word, "Nathan, Nathan, I'm standing up." And Nathan crossed that room the way he'd crossed the boardroom, fast and silent and unstoppable, and he did not catch her because she wasn't falling. She was standing, and catching her would have been the worst thing he could do. The thing he'd known from the very first morning when he watched her transfer herself into a car and did not move a single inch to help. He crossed the room, and he stopped just in front of her, close enough to catch her if she needed it, and far enough to let her have it. And he stood there with his wife, both of them shaking, both of them destroyed, and he said the only thing there was to say. "I see you," he said. "I always saw you." She stood for 11 seconds that first day. The therapist wrote it down with a hand that trembled. 11 seconds. And it was not a miracle the doctors would explain later. Or rather, it was the ordinary kind of miracle, the kind built from years of relentless work on the small chance of might, the kind you only get to have if you refuse to stop going to the appointment, even when you've stopped believing in it. The nerve function had been returning by fractions for years, too small to feel, until the day it crossed the line into something her body could finally use. It would be another 8 months before she took a step, and another year before she could walk across a room. She would use the chair for the rest of her life, for anything that mattered, for distance, for real life, because 11 seconds, and then a step, and then a room, was not the same as walking. And she'd made peace with the chair long before her leg ever held, and she was not about to unmake it now. But she could stand. On her wedding anniversary, she could stand up and dance with her husband for the length of one slow song, her arms around his neck and his around her waist, and that was enough. That was everything, that was more than the world had ever promised her. And here is the thing that Nathan understood standing in that rehab room on that ordinary Tuesday, that he would try for the rest of his life, to explain to people who asked about his wife, and always asked the wrong question first. They always asked if she could walk now, as if that were the story, as if the 14 months, and the murder, and the courtroom, and the company she rebuilt, and the daughter she mothered, and the way she'd kept her own killer talking with her life as the bait. As if none of that were the story. And the only thing that mattered, the only measure of whether it had all worked out, was whether the woman in the chair had gotten up. And Nathan would look at them, and he would think about the first morning when he came around the car to open her door, and a voice cut through the cold and said, "I've got it." And he'd watched her fight her way into the seat over 40 seconds, and he had not moved a single inch to help, because he'd understood something that day that most people never understand in their whole lives, that her strength was never in her legs, that it had never once been in her legs. Her strength was in the woman who told the truth for 14 months, while everyone she loved called her crazy. Her strength was in the CEO who walked into a boardroom full of her enemies and won back her life with nothing but her mind. Her strength was in the sister who sat across from the man who'd tried to murder her and let him confess to save a child she barely knew. Her strength was in the way she'd looked at a motherless little girl and said, "If you'll let me, I'd like that more than anything in the whole world." She did not need to walk to be whole. She had been whole the entire time. The standing was a gift, and they were grateful for it, and it changed nothing about who she was, because who she was had never for one single second been sitting down. So when people asked Nathan if his wife could walk now, he'd learned to answer them the same way every time. He'd learned it from her, the way he'd learned everything worth knowing from her in the back of a car in the truth-telling dark. She could always move forward, he'd say. The walking's just a bonus. They grew old in that penthouse, the three of them, and then in time, more than three, and the company Victoria built became exactly what she'd promised. That first board meeting, the company that saw the people. The world decided didn't matter, and it outlived them both, and it never once forgot why it existed, because she wrote the reason into its bones and made sure everyone who came after knew the story of the CEO and the driver and the little girl who made them a family. Marcus Ellison died in prison years later, and Victoria did not go to the funeral, and she did not cry. And when Nathan asked her gently if she was okay, she'd been quiet for a long moment, and then she'd said, "I forgave him a long time ago, Nathan. Not for his sake. For mine. Hate is just another chair I refuse to spend my life sitting in." And that was the last time either of them ever spoke his name. Emma grew up. Of course she did. She grew up with two parents who had both come back from the dead in their own ways, a father who'd remembered who he was, and a mother who'd never let the world tell her who she wasn't. And she grew up knowing in the marrow of her the only lesson that had ever mattered in that whole impossible story. That the person who changes your life doesn't always arrive with a trumpet. Sometimes he arrives to open a car door you tell him not to open. Sometimes she arrives in the back of a work car with a phone full of games. Sometimes the people who save you look at first exactly like the people the world has decided don't matter, and it is only later, only when it's already too late to go back to being alone, that you understand they were the whole point all along. Emma became a lawyer. She worked in disability rights. Nobody who knew the family was surprised, and on the last good day of that long, full life, Nathan sat beside his wife's chair the way he had for decades and took her hand the way he always did before she even reached for it, because he'd spent a lifetime learning to be there before she had to ask. And Victoria, older now, softer now, but with the same fierce, clear eyes that had once told a boardroom to look her in the face and raise their hands, squeezed his hand and said the thing she'd said 10,000 times and never once meant less than the first. "I trust you," she said. "Do you know what that means coming from me?" And Nathan Cross, who had once been a driver, who had once been a soldier, who had once been a man made so small by grief that he believed the only thing he was good for was getting people from one place to another, looked at the woman he had loved for a lifetime. The woman the whole world had written off and he alone had refused to. And he gave her the only answer there had ever been. "I know exactly what it means," he said. "You bet your life on me once, and you were right." She had been. She had been right about all of it, right when the whole world was wrong, and that in the end was the truth of Victoria Ellison. The truth that outlasted the chair and the crash and the brother and the trial and even the standing up. She was the woman who was right when no one believed her. And the greatest thing Nathan Cross ever did, greater than the war, greater than the investigation, greater than any door he ever opened or refused to open, was simply this. He was the one who believed her. That was the whole story. A woman who needed to be believed, and a man who did. Everything else, the murder, the money, the courtroom, even the miracle, everything else was just the long road they walked to get there. And they walked it together, all the way to the end.